Welcome everybody. In this tutorial series, I'm going to show you how to code in JavaScript. And the best part is it's only 1 hour. JavaScript is one of the more in-demand programming languages, and it's really easy to program in. Now, you're probably thinking how can programming be easy? Well, programming isn't exactly that hard. It's just a lot of the information out there and a lot of the tutorials out there make things way more complicated than they are. So in this tutorial series, I'm going to show you all the basics to JavaScript and to programming in general. You can actually use a lot of these concepts in other languages here. And of course, if you do learn JavaScript, it is a highly marketable skill, as in JavaScript is one of the more in-demand programming languages. So I hope you take the course, and I'll see you guys in the course. Welcome everybody. In this tutorial series, I'm going to show you how to code in JavaScript. It's going to be a small 1-hour tutorial series, but in this hour you will learn a lot about JavaScript. This course is obviously best for people who have never coded before, and if you have coded before in some other language, you'll find that JavaScript is actually quite awesome, and it's really fun to program with. I like JavaScript. In fact, it's probably one of my more favorite languages to work with. Alright, so the one thing you will need for this tutorial series is Google Chrome. Now, you're probably either running Internet Explorer, Firefox, or maybe even Safari. I would just go download Google Chrome right now. The reason is that Google Chrome has the best support for JavaScript, and I would highly recommend using it. I do all my development for HTML5 and anything on Chrome, and it's really good. The second thing you'll need is this free website called JSBin, and you can see that it's up right now, and you can see that there's this HTML code here, which you may or may not be familiar with, but don't worry, I'll be going over this. But it also has CSS, JavaScript, and a console, and I'm just going to click those here, and they'll also see something like this that's run with JS. All this is that you can make applications with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you can see the output of JavaScript not only within the web page, but within a console, which is what JavaScript can also be run in. All right. So you can download Google Chrome. If you don't download Chrome and something doesn't appear the same in the tutorial series, that's probably the #1 reason why. The #2 reason why is that something has maybe changed in the JavaScript world, and it probably won't happen that way. But anyway, let's go on to the next tutorial and let's start to code with JavaScript. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back everybody. Alright, let's talk a little bit about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and how it relates to websites and how JSBin really works. So the first thing is that the reason why we're using JSBin is that when we type something in, we can see it in real time in this output here, and we can run any JavaScript with this little button here, and we'll get to that very shortly, don't worry. So what I like to tell beginners is I like to tell that HTML displays everything on the website. For example, it displays images, it displays links. It sets up the static parts, meaning the parts that don't change of the internet. And what CSS does is it styles everything. So if you wanted to change the text or the font or something like that, you use CSS. And what it does is it takes the pressure away from the HTML and it puts it off its own file, and it makes stylizing your website a little bit easier. Now, JavaScript adds in the function, which is actually really important. And if you're into HTML5 stuff, that's exactly what a lot of JavaScript can do for you. All right. So let's take a look at HTML first. And I'm just going to give you a very small crash course in this. The reason is just because it explains JavaScript a little bit better. So what you can do is you can type in two paragraph tags, which is the greater than and less than sign, and then you can type in some text like this is awesome, like that, and then you can type /p with the two greater than and less than signs around it. And you'll see in the output here that says this is awesome. Now if you added another word here, for example, really awesome, like that, you can see that it changes automatically. So you'll also notice that there is a space here, and that's because it really looks like this, but the window makes it shorter. All right, so it's really awesome. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that. Now what CSS does here is if you type in P and you type in a curly bracket and push enter, you'll see that two curly brackets come up. And the reason why this is that anything within this code relates to the p tag. So we can change the font, we can change the color, etc. And how we do that is you just change color, and then let's change it to red, and you put a semicolon at the end of that. Now, it's really important that you learn the two topics here. You can see that P is a block of code, and we can add in a whole bunch of other things. We can change the font, etc. But you'll also notice that there's a semicolon at the end of this line, and you'll also notice that there are two curly brackets. This is super important, especially in JavaScript and a lot of other programming languages. The curly brackets make sure that this is a block of code. So if I type in something out here, you see it won't work. And sometimes what it will do is it will pop up an error. Now, CSS and web development is a lot less error prone, meaning that you can get away with a lot more, and that's actually really cool. Now, the console here is if you were to put in something with JavaScript here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get rid of the console, and I just want to show you a little bit of JavaScript. And you can type this in. We can go alert, colon, and a bracket, quotes, and you can type in whatever you want. In this case, I'll just type in pop, and a bracket again, and semicolon. All right, now you'll see that when I do this, you'll see that there's a warning down here, and the reason why there is a warning down there is because this isn't complete. Now, for the most part, every line needs a semicolon after that. Now, there are certain lines that don't need a semicolon, but for any line that you're telling the computer to do something, it needs a semicolon. So we're going to go ahead and put a semicolon there. And when you're first starting out, the semicolon is the #1 thing that beginners forget. So put in that semicolon there, and there are times where we don't put in a semicolon, and I will make those apparently obvious to you. All right. The last thing we need to do is you just need to run with JS, and you'll see that this thing comes up and it says pop. And that's exactly what we asked it to do. So programming is telling the computer to do a whole bunch of things. So we're telling the computer to literally just put up a window that says pop. We can type in something else like awesome, like this, and it just says awesome. That's pretty cool. Now, what we're doing here is, again, we just tell the computer to do things. Now, there are some times where you add in two backslashes like this, and what this is that this is what is called a comment. Now, a comment is something that you can just write in here, and it can remind you what to do. So what we've told the computer to do is to alert the user with a pop-up. That's all we've done, okay? And so if I were to write this in pseudocode or code that doesn't necessarily work, that's what we've done here. Now, if you can think of the code, if you can think of something to do, like I need the computer to do this, and you can find the corresponding code, that's really all you need to work with in with coding here. Now, the other thing we can do is, again, before CSS was invented, before JavaScript was really a thing, you could actually add this all within the HTML document. So the HTML document is really kind of the main area of which everything happens. These are just separate files. And if we were to do this off of JS bin, we'd have our HTML document, and we would call the CSS and JavaScript to be like several different text files, and all we would do is we would call it in here. But the way we do that is we type in script, okay? And I'm just going to push enter a couple times, and then the greater than and less than sign, because that's just how you make tags in HTML. And we're going to do /script, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to push Control X or Command X if you're on a Mac, and we're going to put that script in there. Now, what this does is that this essentially runs the JavaScript. We've made a little section within the HTML to run JavaScript. Normally it's in a different file, but you can run it. So if we run this here, it says awesome. And if we change this, we can change this to anything we want. We can change it back to pop. We can change it to your name. You can change it to whatever you really want to. And we're going to go run with JavaScript, okay? And if I take this alert pop, cut, and paste it right in here, and get rid of these script tags, you'll see it's exactly the same thing. So I'm just going to go run with JS. It's pretty simple. All right, so we have the alert pop there. So you can run it within the HTML document. You can even run CSS. You can put the style points within the tags here, and you can run the JavaScript within the HTML. But generally, we do it in different areas here. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so I'm just going to hide the CSS here because we don't need that anymore. And for the most part, we're just going to be talking a little bit about HTML and JavaScript here. Because remember, HTML sets up what it is visually and how the website looks, and JavaScript will add in the functionality, meaning that JavaScript can add something like a calculator or any kind of functionality you'd normally see on your desktop, while HTML just simply displays it. All right, so you can see here, if we run with JS, everything works good with pop, etc. Now what we need to do is we need to add in a button here, and this will be able to call functions, which I'll describe here very shortly. Okay, so I'm just going to type in button here, and I'm going to type in the name. This is a button, just like this, and I'm just going to type in / button, just like that. All right, now if we go ahead and click this button, you can see that JSBin renders this in real time. And if we click this button, it does nothing. And the reason is that, again, we haven't told this button to do anything. And since we haven't told the button to do anything, it won't do anything. However, if we run with JS, the JavaScript file says pop, and that's what it will do. If I get rid of this, guess what? It doesn't do anything because we have essentially there's nothing in the JavaScript file, so there's nothing for the computer to run. Now what we need to do is we need to add something onto this button, and what it will do is it will call a function here, and I'll explain what a function is in just a second, but if you just bear with me for a second and just type in onClick, okay, we go equals 2 apostrophes. That's all we need to do here. And what we're going to do is in these 2 apostrophes, we're going to call this myCoolFunction, okay? And then we need to put 2 brackets at the end of that. So you can see that it says myCoolFunction, and you'll also notice that the cool and function are capitalized while the my is not. So usually the first word you don't capitalize, yet the other words you do capitalize. And the reason is that this doesn't look as good as this. It's just the way your brain kind of filters out the information. And it looks a little bit better like this. All right, so now we have myCoolFunction. We need to hop over to the JavaScript and create a function. So let's just go ahead and we'll type in function. And we're going to go to myCool. We're just going to type in function just like that. And of course, we need the 2 brackets. And then we need 2 curly brackets. We'll push enter twice, and there we go. We got 2 curly brackets. Now, again, if we push this button, it does nothing because there's nothing in the function to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in alert. And I'm going to type in pop, just like that. Okay, just like that. And if we type this in, guess what? It says pop. We can change the pop to awesome, or whatever you really want to, your name, and it changes as well. So what this is that the button tells the function to do something. It calls a specific function. So if I were to take this in, let's say, a real world situation, let's say you have a button and you have a series of, let's say, 10 boxes, right? And you push the button and a little robot grabs a certain box, right? Box number 1. Well, that's essentially what this is. The button goes ahead and it calls a box of code for the computer to run. That's pretty much all it is here. And we can have 1 function, we can have 10 functions, we can have 100 functions, we can have 100 buttons with 100 functions if we really wanted to, all with different names, all right? And so that's essentially what a function is. It's just a block of code that does something, and that's pretty much all we need to know for this tutorial. I'll see you guys next time. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so I want to go ahead and let's redo some of the things that we've done in the last tutorial because it's a really important concept here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and paste it a couple times. Now, if you want to go ahead and type them out too, it's actually really good to type it out, but if you want to copy and paste it, that's up to you too. Now, what we'll do is instead of myCoolFunction, we're just going to call this function 1, and we'll also call this function 2, and I'm going to spell them out here. And then we're going to go function 3, just like this, okay? So you'll notice here that we have this is a button, this is a button, this is a button. What we can do here is we'll just copy this out, and what we'll do is we'll just do 1, and then we'll do 2, and then we'll do 3, okay? And we have to make sure, there we go. So now we have 1, 2, and 3. Of course, none of these work. And does this first button not work anymore is because when we click this button, it's looking for function 1, right? It's not looking for myCoolFunction. It's looking for function 1. In fact, if we changed any of these to myCoolFunction, it would actually work. So if we change this to function 1, guess what? When you click this, it says awesome, okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this a couple times, just like this. And we'll call this function 2, and we'll call this function 3, okay? And so if we click any of these here, we know that they say awesome, and then you can see that it's a prevent this dialog from coming up. That's a safety feature. If you've ever gone to any kind of site and it gives you a pop-up, at least that was exploited 10, 15 years ago, and the reason is there's now something in there. So let's go ahead and let's go, we're just going to type in 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and there we go. So button 1 will call function 1, which will in turn pop up 1. Button 2 will call function 2 and will pop up 2. And button 3 will call function 3 and pop up 3. Okay? So we got 1, 2, 3. Okay? And if you really wanted to have fun, you can call this 4. Right? If you really wanted to, but let's just make it 3. All right, and so you can see that this can scale to whatever we want here. We can have 100 buttons. We can do whatever we want here. Now, of course, functions can do more than just pop-ups here, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next tutorial. I just wanted to reinforce what we learned in the last tutorial, and I wanted to show you that we could scale it as well. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these 2 functions, and I'm going to delete these 2 buttons here. And what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to change this text to something else here, because I'm going to show you that functions can do something else. So it's always good to make your buttons, and this may sound incredibly obvious, but it's always good to make your buttons say what they're going to do. So 1 is very ambiguous. You don't know what's going on, but if you say change the text, the user knows exactly what that's supposed to do, all right? So now, if we click on this, again, it just still says 1 because that's what's in the JavaScript file. Now, if we go ahead and we're going to go and delete that. Now, just for argument's sake, it's better to call your functions and name them appropriately as well. So function 1, 2, 3 is not exactly the best way. You want it to say, change the text. All right? And if we go ahead, and one trick I like to do is I like to copy this and I like to paste it in there like that, okay? So we got change the text, and so now that we do this, it should work. And what you can do is, one thing you can use the alert for, and sometimes I like to do, is just to see if it actually gets there, and it does work, okay? So the changing of the names, that actually it can be a problem, especially with debugging. You can change the name of the function, and then you make a typo or something like that, or something like that happens. All right. So what we need to do is we can't just say change the paragraph to this. Now that's exactly what we wanted to do. And remember that comment function? What we wanted to do is change the paragraph. And that's what P stands for, by the way, is paragraph text. So that's what we wanted to do. Now, wouldn't programming just be super awesome as if we could actually do that? But we can't do that. We have to actually learn the syntax of JavaScript here. So what we need to do is we need to type in ID equals, all right, and then this ID equals, and then we're going to type in 2 apostrophes, and we're just going to say something like paragraph text, just like that. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm not adding in spaces, and the reason is that as soon as you add a space in the worlds of computers, that's like adding in a completely different object. So paragraph is kind of one computer object, and I'm oversimplifying here, but if paragraph is one computer object, paragraph space text is 2 computer objects, but paragraph no space text is one computer object. So we're just going to change it to ID paragraph text, okay? So the next bit here is going to be a little bit of typing, but don't worry about this. What we need to do is this is just how we do it in JavaScript. So what you need to do is you need to type in document, okay, dot get element, and then by ID, okay, and you notice how I'm capitalizing everything there. It's very good to be case sensitive like this. And then what we need to do is, what I like to do is I like to type in 2 brackets here, and I also like to type in 2 apostrophes like that. And you want to do paragraph text just like that, or you can copy this over and put it in there. Okay. So what this small line of code is doing is saying we need to find the ID of paragraph text. Now, the ID could be anything. It could be in the button. It could be anywhere. But what we're going to do is we're going to change the element ID, and we're going to change the paragraph text. But what do we need to change it to? Okay, we need to type in another dot, and we're going to type in inner HTML, and make sure HTML is capitalized, and we're going to equal this. Okay, another 2 apostrophes, and we can change this to whatever we want. We say we changed the text, okay? And then we put a semicolon at the end of that because we're finished that. And you'll notice that the warning sign went away, and there we go. So we got, so first things first is that we set up the paragraph tag into paragraph text, and then in our JavaScript we found it, and that's what this document.getElementID does, is it finds that tag, and then what we need to do is change it here. And I'm just gonna put this here just like this. So that's what it should look like here, and if you want to do that, now I purposely have a bigger monitor, but the reason why I do this in such a small is so that it works better and people can see everything that I'm doing a little bit more. Okay, so if we go change the text, and voila, we have changed the text. Okay, and that's all it is. Right now, obviously, if we click it again, it works. It doesn't work because we've already changed it. Now, if we wanted to do 2 things back and forth, that we could do that as well. Now, you'll also notice that you could do this. You could have an unlimited amount of paragraph tags. So if I just copy this over here, and I typed in paragraph text 2, right, and then I change the text, you'll notice that since I changed this element ID over here, the function only changed this first element ID. So I said function text 2, and then what happens is that it only changed paragraph text. Okay, so if we did paragraph text 2 like this, you can see that the bottom one changed. Okay, and that's how you change text, and that's how you can do anything within change the text within JavaScript. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to actually get rid of this second paragraph tag right here. It's pretty simple, and I'll just go ahead and get rid of that too here. So, and we'll test everything, and everything still works. Okay, now in this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about something called variables. Now, I've told you that the function is like a box of code, and that box of code will do something. But if you could imagine a box of code with a whole bunch of other boxes that hold certain values, okay? And these values don't necessarily run code. All they do is they're like numbers and names or something like that, okay? Now, variables are really important, and they're like a box of information, really. So you have the function, which is a box that does something, and the variable is the box of information. Okay, and variables are super important because they can again be names, they can be numbers, they can be a whole bunch of different types of data, essentially what it is, right? So the first thing we're going to do, in order to actually call a variable, all we need to do is type in var, okay? And this var here just stands for variable, and JavaScript's actually unique in that you don't have to specify the type of variable. So there's different kinds of variables. There's something called a Boolean variable, which is true or false. There's a integer variable, which is numbers, and there's string variables, which is characters. So if you wanted to make a string variable, for example, it would be like my name. You can say your name, anybody's name, but what you couldn't do is you couldn't put a name inside an integer variable or an int variable because integers are only numbers. There's no characters allowed. And you couldn't put a number inside a Boolean variable because a Boolean is only true or false. Now, all we have to do in JavaScript is call the name. So we can type in variable name just like this, and there we go. So now we have a variable. That's all it is. And we can have hundreds of these variables. In fact, if you're making games or apps, you generally have a lot of variables with your program here. And that's one thing when you're learning about programming, you see examples with 2, 3, 4, and maybe on the outside chance 10 variables. But when you're actually developing, you actually use quite a bit. And especially when you're releasing, because you really have to add in a bunch of data for pretty much a lot of things that happen within a program. So we have a variable name just like that. So what we can do is we can go to, let's type this in, variable number, okay? And we'll type this again, we'll call this variable name. And you see I'm putting semicolons at the end of this, and there we go. So the thing is that these variables are the same thing right now. They're just variables, they're just boxes, okay? We'll assign colors to these boxes, okay? So these are both a blank cardboard colored box, okay? But as soon as we do this, and it's called initializing variables, we type in equals 0, okay? Now what we've done is we've changed this variable from being a string variable or just a blank variable to an integer variable. Now again, JavaScript, since it doesn't really distinguish between strings and ints like other languages do, we can actually mash these together. But for the most part, to avoid errors, you want to think of variable number as always going to be a number. It's never going to be a string. And in fact, it's much better if you think of it this way because it will cause a lot of hardships down the road. Now let's go into variable name here. So what we need to do is we need to put in 2 quotes like this, and we're going to type in your name. There we go. Pretty simple, right? Okay. Now let's just do something cool here. What we're going to do is we're going to go alert. And watch this. We're going to type in variable number, just like that. Okay? There we go. 2 warnings. And if you change the text, you see that it comes out as 0. Okay? And if we type in variable name, just like this, change the text, it comes out as my name. Okay? So if we change this to whatever we want, let's say 2, and we change this back to variable number. All right, change the text, and it comes out as 2. So what it is that this alert, and whenever you see this, any kind of brackets, it means you can put something in there. Okay, so this alert here, we typed in, we typed in a string here. Okay, and it came out as pop. But we can also put in any kind of variable we want into that. And you'll also notice that there is a bracket here, and that's for something completely different. Okay, that's for something you can put variables into a function and they can do stuff. But we don't really need to worry about that quite yet. What I do want to show you is that you can actually go and put in variables wherever you want here. Now watch this. If we want to change the text to variable name, just like this. We change the text, and you can see that this is undefined here, and the reason is that I didn't put anything there. So let's just go ahead and put pop here. Okay, and you'll also notice that when we do this here, pop, it does change to variable name. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and delete this here, and you'll see here that if I just expand this out a bit, it'll be a little bit easier to look at. So what you'll see is you see the document.getElementID, paragraph text, inner HTML, equals to the variable name, or we can make it even to variable number. Okay, just like that. And if we change the text, it changes to 2. Okay, and so that's essentially how you use variables. Again, variables are really important because they can take in anything. For example, if you're making a calculator app, you can take in the variable that was typed in and then add it to something, which I'll show you in the next tutorial. I'll see you guys next time. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do a little bit of math here. Okay, so we can see that we changed the text to 2, but guess what we can do with this number here. Okay, we can add in +1. Okay, and so what this will do is this will make it equal to 3. Now let's just do a little bit of math. Let's say 2, and then it'll equal to 4. So you can do a little bit of math here, and I'm just going to squeeze this in here. And well, don't worry about this because remember, it doesn't change here. I just want to focus in on the JavaScript for a moment here. Okay, let's add in another variable here. And we can, again, remember, we can add in as many variables as we want. We're going to call this number, or we'll call it second number. Okay, we're going to make it equal to 2. So they're both equal to 2. And we can do variable number plus second number. Okay. Now you'll also notice, and I'll just move this out even a little bit more. If I double click on this, you can see that it highlights it, and everything works out like that. All right. So if we change the text, it equals to 4. Pretty simple, right? Now watch what happens if we type in variable name plus second number. Now in pretty much every other programming language, this is going to cause some kind of error. And the reason why it causes an error is that in other programming languages, what ends up happening is that you can't add a number to a letter. It doesn't make sense. It's like, you know, if you ask yourself how many apples do we have, and you have, you know, 1 apple plus an orange, it's like 1, but it doesn't really make any sense to the computer. But watch what happens when you do this, okay? It says John plus 2. It just basically mashes everything together. And there's not really a better term for that. It just puts them together, really. That's all it does, okay? Now, you'll also notice that there is no space after John. And the reason is that there is no space here. Now, remember in a couple tutorials ago, I said that spaces is like adding another object, and that's partly true, except for when you have the quotes here. If you have the quotes here, you can put in, you know, 10 of these if you want. Doesn't matter. So we're just going to go ahead and push space, and you can see that it says John 2. Okay, and of course, let's just go ahead and let's just add another variable, and we're going to call this second string. Okay, it's going to be equal to 2 quotes. And we're going to call this, we'll just say John plus awesome. Okay, put another space in there. And of course, there's one thing that's missing, and that is a semicolon. Okay, and of course, we need to change second number to second string. Okay, and if we double click on that, it does work. And there we go. That's all it is. Now, you can do this infinitely if you really want to, right? You can go ahead and push plus variable number, etc. You can do this as much as you want. Programming languages are meant to be like this. They're meant to be anything. Now, of course, if you go ahead and if we were to just do one more bit of math here, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this here. You can do any kind of math you want to. So we have variable number minus 3. And then we can go ahead, it equals to -1. Okay, that makes perfect sense. You can do whatever you want. You can go times, and there we go. Okay, so that's essentially how you use variables, and that's one thing that's really good about JavaScript is that it's not going to throw you an error. It's going to work out in some way. However, I highly recommend that you separate your numbers and your strings into different categories, and that for the most part you don't really add them together like I did, unless you're going ahead and doing that for display purposes. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so I've shown you how to change the text, and I've shown you how to use variables and what variables are. The one thing we need to do is take in input from the user. Now, this is pretty much what computer programming is. You take input and you do something with it. So it reacts to the input that is in the computer, and it's actually fairly simple. So what we need to do is you need to just type in input, and it's pretty simple. Just type in input like this, and you'll notice that an input box comes up like this, and you can type in whatever text you want there. But we do need to type in a couple of the things. We need to type in the word type, and you can put in just text like this, and this way it will only take in text. So remember how I told you there was integers, strings, and booleans, and all these different kinds of variables. In this input box, we're just going to be taking in text. And the reason why this is important is that if you ever want to add numbers together, you do have to take in a different kind. All right? The second thing we need to do is need to add in an ID. So we're going to go ID equals, and then add those 2 apostrophes there. And we'll go change user text. Okay? So we'll just go ahead and we'll do that here. Now, what we need to do is, what will happen is that once we go ahead and put in some text here, we need to find this ID here. Now, I'm just going to go to the JavaScript here. Now, you might be thinking that we could just add in another document.getElementID, etc. But we can't exactly do it like that. Okay? We need to add in another variable here. Okay? And we're going to just add in a var. Okay? And we're going to call this change text, and then we're going to call this variable. Just like this. And then what we need to do is we're going to go to document dot get element by ID. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this exact same ID, which is change user text, and I'm just going to copy and paste it in there. Make sure there's no spaces in between. For example, if you see that there's a space in here, you definitely do not want that. Okay? And we'll just go ahead and close that off there. And the only other thing you need to do is type in dot value. Okay? So now, change text variable is now equal to whatever we put in there. Okay? The only thing we need to do is put in, see where this equal signs is? We need to just type in change text variable. And if you want to copy and paste that, you're more than welcome to. You can double click it and you can see the box shows around that, meaning that it does work. So if we go change the text, it doesn't do anything. But if we do, in this case, let's change it to a name like awesome. And we go change the text, it changes it to awesome, and we can go to awesome 5, and you can see it goes to awesome 5, and we can say is we change the text. Just like that, and there we go. That's all it is. So what we had to do is we had to set up a variable that took this in here. Now, I'll talk a little bit about this in the next tutorial, but you'll notice that the variable is inside the function and not outside, right? I'll talk about that in the next tutorial. I'll see you guys next time. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so let's take a quick look at why the variable is in the function and why it is not outside the function, okay? So if we go ahead and we just copy or cut this out and paste it here, and you can see that if we type in 23, or even, you know, anything like awesome like this, it doesn't work. And you're thinking, well, why is that? Well, first of all, there's this idea of something called scope, okay? And it has to do with these brackets here. And I'm just going to return that on this just like that so we can see this a little bit better. So what it is that if we were to have, let's say, another function here, okay? If I just type in function, you know, fun, okay? And I type in, you know, another thing here, all of these variables here can be used in both of these functions. And for the most part, there would be what we call quote-unquote global variables, meaning that you can see each of these variables within these functions here, okay? So variable number, you can use it here, you can use it here, you can use it anywhere. When you put it inside a curly bracket at any given time, it doesn't matter if it's a function or another kind of computer programming tool that we need, for example, like a for loop, if we put a variable inside there, that means you can't see it out there. So change text variable is not able to see this outside here. Now, the reason why it works in here and the reason why it doesn't work out here is because this document.getElementID can only be used in a function. Okay, and that's why it doesn't really work, because it doesn't, JavaScript doesn't necessarily see that as a viable command outside the functions. So remember, the functions is where most of your computer programming is going to be, okay? And scope is really, really important because at least when you're typing code like this, what ends up happening is that you have different levels of scope. Now, if you've taken any one of my other courses, for example, the non-program courses, for example, how to make apps without programming, how to make games without programming, they simplify this down quite a bit. And this is a topic that beginner programmers tend to really struggle with, is where you can see variables and where you can't see variables. So again, if it's outside the function, you can see them within every function. But if it's inside the function, you can only see that within functions here. Now, right now, there's only two levels. There's a global, which is these up here, and a local, which is in the function. And again, there could be more. So it's better to think of these as just these two kinds of variables at this point in time. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so it's always good to save your project here. So one thing you can do is you can just go, and if you click on this here, you can go and log into an account. And what you can do is you can go to save as template, and then you can go ahead and you can open it up here. All right, so it's pretty simple. And you'll see that, I did have some CSS in here, and even though I closed it, and that's pretty much it. So it's always good to save your project, and I suggest saving it often. So if you haven't already saved this project, go ahead and save this, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting a slightly new project in the next tutorial. I'll see you guys next time. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so there's a couple things that we can actually do here, and I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, and I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that here. Okay, so everything still works. I can type in anything that I want here, and everything still works. It's actually quite awesome here. Now, you can actually call functions within functions. Now, this is really important because you don't want, imagine if you had like a really complicated program that was several pages. You wouldn't want all of that in one function. You'd want to change it up, and there's several ways you can do this. You can actually put another function after the function, or sometimes you can actually call a function in a different file. It's up to you. And but one thing we do is let's just go ahead and make another function, and we'll call this function function work. Okay. We add those two brackets, and of course we need the two curly braces like this. Okay, so now that we have function work here, and for some reason that error has been popping up lately, but you don't need to worry about it. It just means that my work is not going to get saved. Now, watch this here. If I go ahead and I cut this out and I paste it in here, nothing ends up happening. So I type something in here and it doesn't work, and that makes perfect sense because as of now, when we click this button, we're still calling this function here. Now, one thing we could do is we could change this to work, and if we change it to work again, we can change it and it all works. Okay, simple enough, but that's not what I want to do. Okay, watch this. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in here. So we're now calling this function again. If you want to call work, all you have to do is type in the function name, and that's it. So what's going to happen is that when it calls this function here, it's going to go to change the text, and it's just going to call work here. So if I type in the word fun, it should work. All right, and that's all it is. Now you're probably wondering, in this specific example, this is ridiculous, right? But you do need to call functions later, and especially in programming, it's a fairly important option here. So especially in games here, because if I just go ahead, and if you guys are into game development, I can just show you something that's just a kind of a little thing here for games. So there's usually an update method, and what this update method is that it constantly runs on a loop, because games always run on a loop, like it's always refreshing. And then in here you have, for example, score update, and it calls that function, and then you'll have something like lives update, you'll have that function, player logic, etc. So usually that's something where it would work, specifically in games. That's where you would use this a lot, and a lot of games they do have this, where they have a whole bunch of different options here. And sometimes you can even do, for example, player logic, and then it can go to others. Now I could do maybe and talk for an hour on this concept here, but all I wanted to show you is that you can call other functions within functions. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to put this back in here. It's pretty simple, and I'm just going to go get rid of that function right here. In this tutorial, I want to show you something called an if statement here, okay? And an if statement, all it does is it checks to see if something is true. So, for example, if I were to say, you know, if you were to imagine your house and if the heat isn't on, then it's going to be cold. That's what an if statement is. So, and if the heat is on, it's going to be warm. So it checks for a condition and it has an action as a result. So usually you need some kind of variable, and I'm just going to set up a global variable, and I'll call this variable, we can call this variable number or cool number or something like that, right? And we'll make it equal to 1, right? So I will initialize it. All right, so we have cool number. Now, what I can do here is if I put in an if statement, all an if statement looks like is this. So we got if cool number. Now, by the way, what I'm about to show you, I could spend an hour talking about. I'm going to put double equals to 1, okay? And you need a curly bracket again. Okay, and I'm going to put all this in the curly bracket here. So if cool number is equal to 1, then it's going to execute this code. And if cool number doesn't equal 1, then it won't execute the code. So you can imagine that if we type in something here, like this, fun, it still works. But watch this. If I change cool number to 2, and I type in fun, guess what? It doesn't work because cool number is not equal to 1, and so this code doesn't get executed. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to just actually close the HTML here, and let's just take a quick look at this. Now, another thing that JSBin doesn't necessarily do, but pretty much every other programming language does this, is they indent. Okay, and it kind of does this here. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to return this curly brace just because it makes a little bit more sense to look at it like this, even though when I program, I always put it like this because I know what I'm doing, but to explain it, I'm going to go ahead and do this, okay? And you'll see that in here. You can see that, I'm just going to go ahead and tab this out a bit, and you can see that the curly brackets, this curly bracket looks like this, okay? And everything within this function, this is what the block of the function is what my highlighted text here. Everything within the if statement is what I've highlighted in here. So these curly brackets are super important because you need to section off blocks of code because of it. And we've already seen that with a function, but they also work for if statements, okay? Now, in some languages, what will end up happening is that if you have a one-line if statement, so for example, if I just type this in, we have, you know, if cool number equals 1 or equals 2, okay, and then we can type in do something like this. So sometimes you can get away with that, but it's best practices to always put in the curly brackets, okay? So you can see that this is the curly brackets here. And the way it works is that as soon as you open up another curly bracket and you close it, the closing bracket is going to go to the last open curly bracket. So this is a closing bracket, goes up to the last open curly bracket. This is the last closing bracket. It's going to go up to the last curly bracket there, okay? So if cool number is equal to 1, it's going to do that. And we've equaled cool number is equal to 2, okay? Simple enough. And let's just go make sure this works one more time. I'm just going to type in the word fun, and there we go. That's all it is, okay? So that is an if statement. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so let's go ahead and let's go and add something to this if statement. So if I type in any kind of word here and I change the text, it all works. It's just the same as the last tutorial. Now, you can add something to the if statement called an else statement, which is something you just say else. Now, of course, an else statement needs 2 curly braces. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this over and I'm going to paste it in here. Instead of making change text variable to something, I'm just going to make it to a string saying else statement fired, stuff like that. Okay, and all it's gonna say is that when I do this here, for example, if I type in word f here, it's gonna work because cool number is equal to 1. But if I change this to 2, instead of the if statement, it's gonna go to the else. And let's just walk through this. So if the if statement is equal to 1, then this is gonna work. else means that if cool number is equal to any other number other than 1, it will go ahead and put this in here. So I can type in whatever I want, but it's going to say else statement is fired. It's always going to say that if cool number is not equal to 1. It could be equal to 1,000. It can be equal to negative 56. It doesn't matter what cool number is equal to. If it's not equal to 1, the else statement is going to fire. Now, the other thing that we need to check up here is that you'll see that there are 2 change text variables. And why can this work? So you'll see that there is a change text variable here and then a change text variable here. Now, in a couple previous tutorials, I did tell you that you can't make a variable equal to the same name. And I did say that, but it changes a little bit here. If I were to add another variable called cool number, it would throw an exception because the computer doesn't necessarily know which variable to look at. So it could be cool number or cool number, which is the same. It gets confused. However, when you set up a variable within these curly brackets, this works as something called variable scope, meaning that change text variable is only usable within this if statement. I can't use it outside of this if statement at all, right? And again, this change text variable is only usable within the else statement. Okay, it's not usable outside that. So if I hop outside the if statement, and by the way, this is the entire if statement here. This is the if statement and this is the else statement, but the whole thing works like this. Okay, and if you think about it here, this is more function. We can do some stuff in here. But if I type in change text variable, okay, you see that it does kind of work, but you can see that there's a whole bunch of warnings here. The text changes, but again, in this editor, it only looks for the strings within the document. It doesn't look for it inside scope. You need to go to something like Visual Studio or Xcode or something like that, okay? But you can see that there's 4 warnings here, and it's because the variable is essentially undefined, meaning that it doesn't even know it exists, right? And again, remember, you have to declare the variable, which is what I've done here, in order for the computer to see if that variable is actually usable. So again, I can get away with this, and I can get away with actually having the change text variable in as many if statements as I want. I could have 100 of these if I really wanted to. Now, the major question is should you change the variable within the if and the else statement? So for example, here you can see that it says there's 2 change text variables. That could get kind of confusing. Some people do change it up. It's up to you whether you want to do that or not. Personally, I tend to not use these local variables as much as I can. One thing that JavaScript is actually really good at is referencing variables across scope. In other programming languages, it's not necessarily that easy. All right, so for the most part, that is how an else statement works. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. All right, welcome back, everyone. So if we take a look at the warning here, the warning is that there is this change text variable has already been used. Now, you'll see that it works perfectly fine. So you're probably wondering why on earth would it work? And the reason is that JavaScript is actually it kind of patches things together. In other programming languages, this would completely not work. But in JavaScript, it kind of just glosses things over, and what it does is it just kind of makes it work. So there's a couple of things. If I change this to change text variable 1, you'll see that it gives me a new error saying that this is used out of scope. And that's exactly what it means. So this variable you'll see a lot when you're beginning programming. And you'll see that it says this is used out of scope, meaning that this change text variable up here is being referenced outside of these curly brackets. So these curly brackets are really important. In order to change that, you just change in 1 here, and then you see all of the errors go away. Okay? So I wanted to make sure that you know that sometimes when you get an error and it still works, that is a good thing, but you want to make sure that when you do ever ship any kind of code, you want to make sure that it has error-free, because even though it might not make an error in here, it could make an error in another browser or something like that. All right? I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everyone. All right, there's one other type of statement that you can use. And I'm just going to push return a couple times, and I'm going to type in else if, all right? And I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 curly brackets, and there we go. Now, the other thing you need to do is you need to make sure that these are touching like that, okay? And so what I'm going to do is there's only one other thing that we need to do, and we need to type in two brackets like this, and we're going to say if cool number is double equal to 2, okay? And you can see that all the warnings disappear. And what I'll do is I'll just type in an alert, okay? And just to see if this works here, and we'll just type in pop or something like that. Okay, there we go. So if cool number is equal to 2, this should just end up being an alert, okay? And if I change the text here, and you want to make sure that everything is working here, so there we go, and there we go, it works. Now, so the way this works is that this again, computers read lines like you read books line by line, and they read every line. So what it does is that when this function is called, and remember it's function being called from this HTML here, this function is called, if cool number is equal to 1, it does this, okay? If it doesn't equal to 1, we then go to the else if. You know, cool number is equal to 2. And in this case, cool number is equal to 2, and then we go ahead and run this code. And if cool number is not equal to 2, it will run whatever's in the else statement. So if I just type in fun here, you can see the else statement is fired. Okay, that's pretty much what it is here. Now, the other thing is that you can't have 2 else statements that are the same. Okay, so you can see that cool number 2 is equal to 2, and then if you type something in differently here, then it is going to throw an exception here. And you notice how there isn't any warnings here, and the reason is that, again, JavaScript likes to make things work. It's actually quite awesome. But what you can do is you can see is equal to 3, and you can just type in something else here. So cool number is equal to 3, and if I type something in here, for example, like this, you can see that whatever code was in the else if statement, the second one, is fired here. So the order, or the hierarchy, as you will go from if to else if to else, okay? And again, it reads it line by line. Now, when you're making your else if statements, it's best that you make them in any kind of logical order. So if you're doing things numerically like I've done here, so we have cool number is equal to 1, then we do this. Else if cool number is equal to 2, then we do this, and else if cool number is equal to 3, we do this as well. And it's not like 1, 2, 4, 3 or something like that. You want to make sure that it's actually quite easy to understand, okay? And of course, you can have a ton of else if statements. You can have 50, 100. Now, one thing about if statements is that they're a pretty important part of programming. However, you don't want to rely on if statements only. So as you get to become a better programmer, you'll find better ways to do things other than if statements. So you have an if statement, it works out really well. I mean, every program has an if statement in there somewhere. But at the end of the day, you want to eventually grow out of the if statement. All right? I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Welcome back, everyone. All right. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to go ahead and delete this if statement because we don't really need it anymore. And I'll just go ahead and, yeah, everything works out good here. I'll just move this over. Now, one thing that we can do is we can actually change the CSS or any style point within JavaScript. And it's actually kind of cool. So what it is that technically you can do everything within this HTML file. If you really wanted to, you could add in the script, you can add in the style points, etc. So essentially, if you wanted to change anything here, you can do that. The reason why CSS and JavaScript were invented, and for the most part why they are in separate files, is to make it look a lot easier. Okay. So as you can see, the CSS, remember, it changes the style of it, so it makes it so. The short answer is that it makes it look different. And what I'll do here is I'm going to change this paragraph text. I'm going to change the color. So how do we do that? So again, if we just simply run the program here, you can see that it works out. But what we need to do is we need to go ahead and we need to find this here. Remember, we need to find this tag. Okay? And in order to do that, we do document.get element by ID. Simple enough. And then, of course, which one are we getting? We're getting paragraph text. Okay. And this time, though, we're going to go .style because, again, there are style in the HTML. There are style tags, and in CSS, we essentially take those style tags out. So .style, and then you type in whatever you want. So you can change, the background color, the color, etc. So let's just change the color. It's pretty simple, and we'll change it to maroon. And maroon is the most underrated color, and there you go. So if I go ahead and I change something, so if I type in any kind of word here, you can see that it changes. Now you may or may not be able to see that, so I'm going to change it to orange instead. So we're going to change it to orange like that, and there we go. Okay, and you can see that the text changes to orange here. Now, one thing I should probably mention, and I have mentioned this in my HTML classes, is that if you type in a paragraph here, for example, and you say, this is another paragraph like this, you can see that they're both in the same color here, because what the CSS does is it changes the style tags for everything, right? So if P here, which is the paragraph tag, we can change it to red, and if I change this to, maroon, like that, you can see that they change to maroon. But when we run this here, so I type in the word fun, right, and you'll see that the top one changes to orange, but the bottom one doesn't. And why is that? Is because this one has the ID paragraph tag. Now, if I go ahead and copy this paragraph tag and move it down here, watch what happens. I change it to word fun, and you can see that here, this one doesn't change. It's because it already has an ID, right? It won't change because, again, it's already being referenced, okay? And so for the most part, that is how you change style tags with JavaScript. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.